Hey, you caught me. I was just putting a new quilt up on the wall and you caught me midstream. It is time for our Sewing and Slippers with Sue. And I didn't quite get the quilt up on the wall that I had intended to show you. So I'll be talking to you as I finish putting up that quilt. So today we are going to be brainstorming. I am super excited to be here to talk about applique, and I have a product review for you. It is chalk products. So marking tools that use powdered chalk. So I want to show you several different marking tools that accept powdered chalk, not the one you're probably thinking of. The Pounce powder is what most people think of when they think powdered chalk. So if you're familiar with the Pounce powder, we will be doing a demonstration of that another day. Once I have a long arm quilting machine out there, we're going to be using the Pounce powder and looking at different types of quilting stencils that we can use the Pounce powder with. But I use the Pounce powder for another application, and I want to show you some of the tools that accept that powdered chalk. So let me get this quilt up on the wall, and I want to talk to you about this quilt. Many of you might be hesitant to show your quilts. And I want to talk to you about the quilt show that I attended this past weekend with my own quilting guild. It was so much fun, and I want to share a little bit of that experience with you. Some of you know that I went on Facebook Live and walked through the quilts in my quilt show. Not the whole show because it was huge, but the last 2 rows of quilts, which were the big bed quilts. Now this quilt over here, this quilt hung in the show. And as I was doing that Facebook Live, I turned the corner and I was amazed to see that there was a red ribbon on the quilt. So I want to give you a little history of this quilt and tell you that I was very hesitant to show this quilt. Now, I always say as a quilter, we should never, ever point out our flaws. But on this quilt, I want to tell you why I was hesitant to show it. And I want to talk to you about the eye of the beholder. The people that are looking at that quilt, they don't see all the imperfections. They just see the beauty of the quilt. Well, good morning, Elaine. Yes, I did have a very busy day yesterday. We had several classes and meetings yesterday, and the two most important were I did the Almost in Baltimore block number 15 for our Ahead of the Curve members, and then that was immediately followed, excuse me, that was immediately followed by a member orientation for new members of our Ahead of the Curve program. And they were both fabulous times. I had a wonderful time in each. And I've got some follow-up work to do for each of those meetings. So yeah, I had a super good day and I'm excited to dive into the projects that came out of those 2 meetings. Mary, good morning. I did get your email this morning and I'm working on the follow-up to the class yesterday. So hold on, I will be working on that as soon as we're done with Facebook Live. Good morning from Missouri. Let me know who that is in Missouri because I'm not seeing your name. I'm on StreamYard, and that's a service that I use to go live in multiple locations. So I don't see your Facebook name here on StreamYard. So just let me know how you are. Who you are when you're commenting. Bev, good morning. Lovely to see you. And Doreen from Vermont, so good to see you as well. I love it. Okay, my room looks great. Let's talk about that room as I am getting that quilt up on the wall. So let me know if you can't hear me. I'll try to project because my microphone's way up front, but I think it should be okay. So I'm taking down one quilt, and I just have a design wall here that is made from like a composite material. It's like a pressed paper. I think they call it Homosote board. And I use that to pin up my works in progress, as well as to show you different quilts that I want you to see. So I'm taking down my magical garden because we had our first garden party last week, and I won't be having another garden party for another 2 to 3 weeks. So I'm taking down that quilt and I'm setting up this one so that we have something special to discuss here at our Facebook Live today. Now that Homosote board is very hard, and I just used these corsage pins to hang up a quilt and press those pins every 4 to 6 inches right into the Homosote board. I know you're all screaming at me for getting in a dangerous position here with one foot on my sewing machine table, but it was just for leverage. I'm all good. Okay, so let's talk about this quilt, and you can see the beautiful red ribbon on it. What a surprise that was. So I'm going to take off the description that, let me get my shoes on here. I'm going to take off the description that hung with the quilt. And I want to say this quilt generated a lot of interest at the show. Why? Because my methods are so unusual for making a quilt like this. Now, normally, people who make this quilt, it's called a modified 9-patch. People who make this quilt make a curved 9-patch block. So that block has all kinds of curved edges on it, and it is so prone to stretching. These long, graceful points are a nightmare when you are doing curved piecing. Then people cut out these melons by hand, of course, because they're not appliquing the melons. They are making the melon with a seam allowance. So it has to be a very, very, very specific size, or it's not going to fit into that curved 9-patch. Well, one of my friends was at the show as a white glove helper, and she was explaining to everybody how I made this quilt. So I want to show you how I made this quilt. Well, the first thing I did was I took my Grand Leaves Galore tool and I cut out all of those red melon shapes. I used a nice dark red solid fabric. I think it's a Kona cotton. And I fused the back of the fabric first in order to cut out those melons. Now, I don't cut out the melons one at a time. I actually cut out the melons 3, stacked one on top of the other. And with my rotary cutter, I can cut out those melons in no time at all. But it doesn't stop there. I use 4 layers of fused fabric at a time. So I'm cutting out not 3 melons, but 12 melons at a time. It's so fast and easy to get the melons cut for that quilt. Now, those melons have fusible on the back. So what are they fused to? They're fused to a simple 9-patch block. Those blocks are made so that the center is smaller than the blocks on the sides. It's all explained in the pattern, and I do have a pattern for this quilt on my website. Okay, this quilt is called Get Your Kicks on Route 66. So let me tell you a little bit about the history of this quilt. So I was traveling on Route 66 with my husband, my friend Penny, and her husband Mark. We were doing the Road to California Quilt Show. My husband and Penny were working at the show with me. Mark was just going there for some fun, and he was visiting antique shops and little cafes and different things while we were at the show. But we had some time together, and one of those days was my birthday that we had together before the show. So we all went out for a really fun trip down Route 66 into Las Vegas. So we had a great day in Las Vegas. And on another note, that wasn't my birthday. On my birthday, we did some antique shopping. So I went into a little antique store and I found a beautiful quilt that looked just like this, minus those borders, the applique borders. And their quilt was done in bubblegum pink. I actually have that quilt, but I didn't pull it out for you to see today. But that's okay. I'm just going to tell you the story about that quilt. So because it was my birthday, my husband said, do you really want to take that quilt home with you? And I said, yes, 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 I do. I love modified 9-patch, and I hadn't made this quilt yet. So I based this quilt on the antique quilt. Now, the antique quilt had 30s fabrics and bubblegum pink as the melons. And it was done the traditional way, hand-pieced, where each one of those pieces was a curved edge, and 2 curved edges sewn together are like oil and water. They don't go together. But when you stretch them and pull them together and stitch them by hand, you can get those curved seams to match. It's not easy, but you can do it. And people are doing it more and more on the sewing machine now to make it a little bit easier, but it's still an advanced skill. Well, you don't need to be advanced to make this quilt, because what you're making is 9-patch blocks that are uneven. The center part is smaller than the squares on the edges, and they're all squares on the edges. This is just a regular square 9-patch block. It finishes up at 8 inches, so the blocks are 8.5, and you put them together with 1/4-inch seams. Now you have an entire quilt that's all just squares, and over that quilt you lay out your melons over the seams, press them in place, and stitch them with a blanket stitch. It's so easy. But when people came across this quilt at the quilt show, they said, oh my gosh, that's such a hard quilt to make. We're going to vote for that for a ribbon. Not only does it have curved piecing, but it has the applique borders. Wow, she must be an expert. Well, I happen to be an expert in machine applique, but any quilter can make a quilt like this one. It's really very, very straightforward. It does take time, like anything else worth doing. It takes time to cut and fuse and stitch all of those blocks, but it doesn't take anywhere near the time that it would take to do this the traditional old-fashioned way. So I get such a kick out of this ribbon because this was a last-minute entry. They needed more quilts for the show, and I said, oh, I've only entered 1 quilt. I need to enter at least 2. So I dragged this quilt out. I had never entered it before in a show. So I said, you know what? It deserves to be seen. Even though it's simple, it might appeal to people that want to do something easy. And at a quilt show, I love to not only have real heirloom quilts, but at our shows, I like to have some more simple quilts so that people don't look at something and say, oh, I could never do that. They want to look around the show and say, hey, I could do that. And this was one of those quilts for me. Anyone could make this quilt, and I can easily show you how. So there is a pattern for this. It's called Get Your Kicks on Route 66, and it is in my website shop. Now you can get the pattern, or you can get the PDF pattern download. They're both the same price, doesn't matter, but you save shipping if you just download the pattern yourself. You can print it out right away, and you can get started making this beautiful quilt. So that's a little bit about the history of this quilt. And I wanted to point out why I didn't think it was show worthy. So I want you to look at your quilt in a whole new light. The people that are walking through the quilt show, some of them are quilters and some of them are just community members that want to see what this beautiful art show is all about. So they come out in droves for these quilt shows. And yes, you have some quilters that are looking at the nitpicky details, and you have other people that are just viewing this as a beautiful quilt. Now, I do want to say I'm even more excited because the ribbon was given to me not by the general public that doesn't know quilting, but it was given to me by the members. It was the ribbons are voted on by the members. So it's a more educated level of quilter with more experience that is judging your quilts. So first of all, kudos to Pam Bowen. Pam is my professional machine quilter who did a stunning job of echo quilting the border and chose a beautiful pattern, a simple pattern, but a beautiful pattern for the center of the quilt. So half of this recognition is absolutely because of Pam Bowen's beautiful machine quilting. I do want to point out that when you are appliquing over a pieced quilt, there are chances that your applique points are not going to always come together. So I always say, do not point out your errors in a quilt because nobody else will notice. But you might hesitate to put one of your quilts in a show because you see the errors. You see the little blunders, the little mistakes, the little places where things didn't come out just right. Realize that even an educated quilter may not pick up on those mistakes. So we don't point them out, but yet I'm going to, because I really want you to recognize that everybody makes mistakes. Even the person who is teaching applique makes mistakes. So there are points on the corner here on my quilt where I have a loose piece of fabric. I didn't blanket stitch this bottom corner because it was the corner of one of the melons. But then when I put on my borders, the borders were not perfectly straight. And I had to put on the borders somewhere. So some of the points would get cut off and other points would be actually that seam would be actually below some of the points that I intended to come just to the corner. So this border actually came below the intersection where these two melons match, and you're seeing a little bit of the white block underneath. So this corner right here has a little bit of white, and it drives me crazy because that's actually an error in the stitching. So that's going to drive me nuts. What am I going to do? Well, first of all, you can ignore it because nobody else in the show even noticed that. But if you can't ignore it, what I want you to do is grab that quilt and grab some red thread and go ahead and do some stitching in that area. Now, I chose my backing really carefully because I knew there was a few places I'd want to do some red stitching to cover up white areas. So I chose a busy red backing fabric. I should have repaired the problem before I even sent it to the machine quilter, but I didn't. So when it came back and it was really noticeable to me, I knew that I'm going to make some adjustments to that quilt by stitching over that area. But you know, I had to get it in the show. I ran out of time. I went ahead and threw it in the show, forgetting about that corner. Well, here's another way that you could fix that little error. The white catches your eye, the white underneath that corner. So I could take a red Pigma marker, and I have some of those right on hand. I can grab my red Pigma marker and just color in the white fabric under in that corner so that your eye is not going to go straight to that glaring bit of white. It's going to cover it right over and you won't even know it's there. So you can either fix it with a red marker, or you can go ahead and stitch over it like a little satin stitch just to cover over that tiny little bit of white that draws my eye right to that inaccurate corner. So there's always a way. But what this all brings me back to is how critical are you of your own work? If you were viewing your quilt from another quilter's eyes, how critical would you be? We give everybody else a whole lot of leeway. We give everybody else a lot of credit for what they do, and we do not look for imperfections in other people's work. It's just not a natural thing. You're looking at the beauty of a piece and not the little tiny imperfections that just honestly make us human. They don't take away from the beauty of the quilt. you are the only one that sees your imperfections in your quilts. Now, if this quilt is going to be shown at a big show, if it's going to be judged by the best judges, I absolutely would not have chosen that quilt for that type of a show. But this is a local show with friendly people that just want to see the beauty of the art that you are making. So I'm encouraging all of you to go into these shows with the right mindset. So that mindset brings me to my main topic for today. I'd like to brainstorm for just a couple of minutes. And all of you that are out there, I want you to write comments in the chat, okay? Can you promise me you're going to write some comments, whatever comes to mind when we brainstorm about why is it that we're so critical of ourselves? And is it our own self-criticism that stops us from moving forward? Have you ever had one of those days where everything goes wrong? I know I have. And I always say, God's trying to tell me something. I need to quit right now before I make a huge mistake. Now, sometimes it's because you're tired or you are overworked. You've been working all day. You've been making decisions all day long, and making another decision for your quilt just seems mind-boggling. So yes, you've all had those days. Absolutely. Yes. Okay. So you just ordered the PDF. How fun. Okay. So I want you to brainstorm on what stops you from moving forward on a project. Okay. I want to see answers popping up in the chat. What stops you from moving forward? I'm going to get you started. Something that stops me from moving forward is my mindset that I don't have enough time. I don't have time to get this done. I don't have time to sit and sew. Time is always on my mind, and I have a very negative relationship with time. I have no time to get to sew for 24 minutes a day. 24 minutes a day would get me to my goals. And yet I don't follow my own advice every day and take 24 minutes a day for sewing. Now, what stops you? Is it not having all of the materials at hand? So maybe what's stopping you is not having the right fabric, not having the right tool, not having the right fusible, not having the right thread, the right color. So not having something can stop you right in your tracks. Well, we're going to talk about making do. Okay. I want to look at, you're afraid to free motion. Okay. Fear of making mistakes. Fear of making mistakes. Love it. Fear of making mistakes. I'm writing these down because we're brainstorming for a reason here. We're going to put together a solution for each one of these problems. Fear of making mistakes. Okay. What else? Too many projects. Too many projects. Okay. Space. Lack of space is slowing you down. Lack of space. I can certainly address that one today. You notice my workroom is looking better. I have a huge lack of space. This is a 12-foot by 14-foot sewing room. I definitely have a lack of space. You need to learn something. You need to learn something to continue. Learn to continue. Need more knowledge, right? Free motion is holding you back. I'm hearing that several times. Prioritize. Too many projects. Prioritize. Okay. Too many projects. Space is an issue. It does stop us. The quilt I shared last night was very wonky corners since I wasn't really sure on how to do it, but I'm jumping in and I did it anyway. I'll be sure those corners are at the bottom in the show, and maybe not so many will see it. As you said, Sue, it's good to put some of those types of quilts in the show to encourage new quilters. Okay, so you have an issue with your quilt that you don't know how to solve. You have wonky corners, or some technical issue with the quilt. Okay. I want to address all of these and keep them coming in. What stops you in your tracks when you are working on a project? You want to get it done, but you don't know how to move forward. It's something is stopping you from moving forward. And most of the time, it's all your mindset. So let's talk about, I always think I might find a better fabric or a better pattern for the fabric that I have. You procrastinate. Okay, procrastinate because you might find a better fabric. You might find a better pattern for that fabric, right? Okay. All right, good. These are wonderful reasons why. My number one reason why is time. My number two reason why is space. Okay. And I love that you brought that up as well. So let's talk about each one of these things, and let's talk about our mindset. One of the things that I have been diving into this year is a course on mindset. It's not really a course, it's actually a membership. So I belong to a group called Positive Mindset for Entrepreneurs. And Dana Wilde, who wrote the book on mindset, wrote a book on mindset. Of course, there's many out there. She is a person who does not have a college degree. She dove right into direct sales out of high school, I believe. She's done all kinds of different jobs, and she has built $2 million plus businesses with that background. She loves studying mindset, and she strongly believes and knows in her heart that it's because her mindset of positive expectation. She's expecting excellent results from what she does, and she gets excellent results. So positive expectation is something I want to talk to regarding mindset. Okay. One of the things that I find when I'm working with a group of quilters, and of course we are all different, and we all have our different backgrounds and our different mindsets, our different levels of perfectionism. We have different levels of comfort for having some errors, and we have different levels of comfort with learning new things. Many of the reasons that you gave me for something stopping in your tracks revolve around fear of making mistakes, fear of using that fabric in a project and then having something better come along the way, fear of making a quilt and not being perfectly satisfied with the fabrics that you chose, fear of messing up a quilt top because you're not confident with machine quilting. Most of the concerns that you had, other than space and time, go back to fear of doing something wrong, right? Now, when you enter a project with a very positive expectation, you know this quilt is going to be beautiful when you finish it, but you can't get yourself to finish it for fear of doing something wrong. Having the mindset of positive expectation every step of the way gets you to the result you want in a much faster and more direct path than getting sidetracked on all of these different avenues because of fear. That's what procrastination is. It's all fear of doing something wrong, not getting it right the first time, having to rip out, making mistakes. But fear paralyzes us. So one of the mindset tricks, or it's not even a trick, one of the ways that we can help with a positive mindset is to surround yourself with a group of very, very positive people. People who are encouraging you, people who are sharing their own tribulations and trials with you, people that are just like you and have the same fears and the same concerns, yet you go about doing something anyway. So one of the methods that Dana has for that positive expectation is really, it's difficult, right? It's difficult when you have lived some way your entire life. It's difficult to then change your mindset, change from being a procrastinator to being an action taker, change from being paralyzed by fear to being excited about the possibilities. In order to make that change, it takes a bit of work. So I really want to encourage you to find somebody, whether it's your sister, you know, Bev, I'm thinking about you, whether it's your kids, your significant other, your spouse, somebody that lives with you, a coach or a mentor that you pay to encourage you. We all need to find somebody that's going to be in our corner, someone that is going to be appreciative of your work, somebody that's going to pat you on the back when you can't do it yourself. Having a quilt in a show like this is a great pat on the back. You can go to that show, be a fly on the wall, watch as people look at that quilt and try to figure out how you made it. Watch as the people say, "Oh, I love that fabric." Now, you might even get somebody that says, "Hey, you know what? I wouldn't have chosen those fabrics." So you do have to have a little bit of a thick skin when you put yourself out there with a quilt in the show. But I want you to reframe those comments that you might think of as negative and actually realize that they're not actually negative comments. They're just differences of opinion. They're differences of preferences. You're not going to go into everybody's house and look at the style of their decorating and say, "Oh, this works for me. I could live here." Every person has a different style of decorating. When you go into their house, you might say, "I wouldn't have chosen that orange color for the dining room wall, but you know what? It works in here. It's good for them." So more power to them to be that adventurous that they chose that orange for their dining room wall. When we reduce fear of making mistakes, we're actually willing to take some chances. And how do we do that? It's only with lots of practice. That positive mindset of positive expectation, knowing that you're going to be happy with the result, knowing that you're doing the best you can do at this time, knowing that a project is going to teach you something new. So Elaine said she procrastinates when she realizes that she doesn't have all the knowledge she needs to take that next step. So now Elaine says she procrastinates. I see the beautiful work that she's getting done. And I also know she's in my club. Elaine is in my Ahead of the Curve membership. So she's actively going out and seeking the knowledge that she needs to get to that next level so that it doesn't have to make her stumble the next time she encounters that applique project that needs a certain technique. Now, I know a lot of you love taking workshops with different quilters. This is a fabulous thing because you are energizing that store of knowledge so that when you do go to make a quilt, you can pull out the knowledge you need to get that quilt done. So having a positive expectation doesn't mean that your every quilt that you make is going to go into Paducah. That's not the type of positive expectation I'm talking about. I am saying that you have to know in your heart that your quilt is going to be beautiful to you and to the people that love you. You know your quilt is worthy to stay on that bed, to hang on that wall. It's going to be a gorgeous quilt. Now, I'm not saying that you have the positive expectation of winning an award at the IQA show, the International Quilt Exhibition in Houston. Having a positive expectation just means you are confident that you can do a beautiful job to the best of your abilities at this time, and that project is going to move you forward in knowledge, in getting a project off of your to-do list. It's going to energize you to make that next quilt. So having positive expectation of your work is the key to moving yourself forward. And yes, it doesn't happen overnight. That brain training takes time and it takes practice. And the only way to practice this conversion of your brain from being a little bit on the negative side to always looking towards that positive expectation, towards that positive side, it takes time and it takes people surrounding you that are going to build you up and hold you up and raise you up to the level that you want to be. So I really wanted to talk about those things that make us stop, the things that prevent us from moving forward. And I pretty much have narrowed just about every one of these down to fear. Fear of disappointing yourself. And I want to challenge that. We are disappointing ourselves by not moving forward. We're disappointing ourselves by having a beautiful fabric collection and not the quilts to show for it. We're disappointing ourselves by spending money on projects and not bringing them to a finished project that people can enjoy. Once we get over that fear, and it is a constant battle, once we face that fear, we need to let ourselves know that everyone has those underlying fears. I had the fear of putting this quilt in the show because I see all of my mistakes. My eye goes directly to them. But the world out there is just looking at the beauty you create, and they're not being critical of you. They really want to be out there to support you and to love what you do. So many of these problems came down to fear, but there's a couple that we have not addressed yet. Lack of space. I would equate lack of space, or I would link lack of space to lack of organization. I know from the old adage, if everything has a place and everything is put in its place, things are much easier to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Now, I have a tiny little sewing room here, and when I work on a project, it looks like an explosion happened. This morning, I had to scurry around and tidy up because I taught yesterday, and I had bits and pieces of fabric everywhere. What does Tim Gunn say on Project Runway? Flotsam and jetsam everywhere. I don't even know if those are the right words or if that's the right way to say it. But I love it when he says that, because that's how I feel when I'm in my sewing room. There's little bits and pieces of fabric all over this floor. There's patterns, there's pattern pages, there's my instructions that are all out of order, and it all needs to be put back together. So if I have a project box for every single project, or a project bag for every single project, and I have all of those in another storage room lined up with names on them, I can easily go to the project I want to work on, pull it out, work on it, and put it back away again. Sounds good, right? The fact is that we don't do it. We think about it, We intend to do it. We go and buy a couple of plastic bins. We put away a couple of projects. There's 30 more on the table. So finding a place for everything and putting everything in its place, I want you to think about that when you look at your lack of space. Yes, you do have to store all of this stuff somewhere, but you can come up with some creative solutions for those storage problems. The back of a closet, the back of a linen closet. My mom has things stashed away in her kitchen cabinets because she doesn't cook anymore. So she's got kitchen cabinets filled with fabric. I had another friend that used to stuff pillows with her extra fabric, and she had pillows on her couch that was stuffed with fabric, under beds, under couches, in unused china cabinets. There are ways to figure this out, but it does take some planning, and it takes a little bit of effort to get your room looking the way you want it to, so that when you walk into your room, it's inspiring and energizing rather than draining. I know that when everything is just disheveled, I don't feel like working. I walk in here, I get discouraged, I don't know what to start with, and I walk back out again. This is that procrastination that really plagues many of us. So making lists, setting priorities for those quilt tops, that will go a long way to getting you organized. On those lists, you can jot down, this project is in the china cupboard because I had room for one more box in there. This project is in the garage because I have a bin out there of projects. So keeping everything in its place really will make a big difference in that procrastination. So lack of space is a real issue. I get it. So we want to go vertical. We want to use all of our space right up to that ceiling. I've got room up here where I could put a few more shelves, and I could put my boxes up here. Every bit of my room is some type of organization. Now, my thread is all on the wall. I have 5, 6, 7 different thread racks. Oh, probably 8 or 10 different thread racks because there's a couple behind that quilt. The other day, I went through all my thread and I took out everything I don't use anymore. Things that I used to hand quilt. I have a whole selection of hand quilting thread. It was all on one rack. I didn't need that rack. So I took that all down. I put it into little plastic bins like this one right here. I cleaned off a shelf in my garage, and all the thread that I don't use on a regular basis, like once a week, all went into these bins, and they're going out to the garage. I took down several of my thread racks, which gives me more room for my project racks. So there are lots of creative ways that you can go about organizing a small space. So organization is the key, and I want you to overcome that challenge to allow you to move forward. And it doesn't have to be a huge project. It can be just a day of tidying up, and the next day you have a very successful completion day. Then you're going to need another day for tidying up. Take 20 minutes or so to tidy up your space. And then the next day you can feel very accomplished. When you get into that routine and that pattern, that's going to alleviate some of that tension around having a small space because you are taking the time to keep it organized. So that's one of the challenges. Time. Time is always my challenge, but I'm challenging myself to look at time a little differently. I get addicted to television programs. And even though I allow myself an hour to watch a television program each evening, I find myself flipping through the channels for the next hour or even 2, watching things that I'm really not even excited about. I'm just sitting on my couch and I want to stay there. So maybe it would be better time spent to be on my computer designing a new quilt on EQ, or actually get up and go into my sewing room and clean up after that day's mess so that the next morning I'm ready to dive right in to my next project. So, are we really using our time wisely, or are we spending time doing things that really don't amount to progress? Another thing with time is I say, oh my gosh, 24 minutes a day, there's no way I can fit that in. Yet my husband and I sit and we have coffee. And then after we have coffee, he goes up to shower and I start searching on the internet and playing with Facebook and answering emails. You know what? If I just went down into my sewing room and spent 24 minutes every day, then I could answer emails. Then I could go on Facebook and look at all the comments on the beautiful My Magical Garden color charts. We can always find a way to fill our time, but we want to prioritize that 24 minutes a day. And it seems like it goes by instantly. Once you get started sewing, that 24 minutes is just going to get eaten up. You might even spend another 24 and then another 24. Before you know it, you have an hour into your project and you've really gotten something accomplished. So again, it's a mindset issue that if you keep telling yourself you don't have time, that will actually happen. You won't have time because you'll fill up all of that time with other unnecessary things. So it's definitely a self-fulfilling prophecy when you tell yourself all the time that you don't have time, you don't have space, you're a procrastinator, you don't know how to do this, you don't know how to do that. All of those negative don'ts hold you back from that positive expectation. If instead you tell yourself, I know I can find 24 minutes today, and I know I can find 24 minutes tomorrow. If you keep that positive reinforcement in your own mind, it's going to happen. If you say, I know I can put away my project at the end of the day, I know that I can spend 10 minutes just tidying up, just like you used to do when the kids were little, and you spent 10 minutes tidying up the toys at the end of the day. You can do the same thing in your sewing room, and you know you're going to be excited and ready to get started the next day. So these little tiny habits are things that can start moving you in the right direction, and this positive expectation breeds itself. Positivity breeds more positivity. The more positive thoughts you have, the more positive results you're going to see. And that just feeds you into that cycle of positive expectation. Well, I've really had some fun today looking at your challenges. I hope that this little nudge into positive mindset has maybe just clicked a little switch in your head and you say, you know what, that sounds just like me. Well, how do I know that? Because I am just like you. I have all the same fears. I have all the same worries. I have all the same concerns about showing my quilts and what will people say and will people be critical. And when you have all those negative things happening in your mind, you will find reinforcement out in the world for all of those negative things. When you have all of these positive expectations in your mind and all of this excitement about what you're going to do, then all of your reinforcement, you're going to see all of the positive things that reinforce these habits. All right. What's the name of the book you were referring to? It is called, oh my gosh, her name is Dana Wilde. Dana, I'm going to spell it out to make sure I do this right. Wilde. And it is, I'm drawing a blank, but it does have mindset in the name. Her podcast is Positive Mindset for Entrepreneurs. So that might not apply to all of us, but I've been talking to her about positive mindset for quilters. I think we all need it, whether we are entrepreneurs, we're business people, we're stay-at-home moms, we're quilters, we're retired, whatever situation in life you find yourself in, positive expectation and positive mindset is so, so important. I belong to her club, which is called the PME Club, Positive Mindset for Entrepreneurs. It is a group of entrepreneurs that are all seeking out that positive reinforcement. I love it. I highly recommend it, but it may not apply to that entrepreneurial side may not apply to you, but the positive mindset definitely will. So I strongly recommend it, even though it might not be slanted in your direction. Okay? All right, I will get that book out so I can give you the exact name, and I'll put it here in the comments once I find it. Now, I have just cleaned out my sewing room, cleaned out my TV room. I'm getting new carpeting tomorrow, so I will be out of commission for a couple of days where I'm going to have to take this computer down, put it all back together again. I've got 2 computers to do that with. I've got all of my electronics, including my irons and my sewing machines that have to go upstairs. So I'm going to be out of commission for a couple of days, but that's just going to get me in a better position to get in here and get perfectly organized so that I can start off fresh next week. So I want to wish you all a very happy Easter. For me and my family, it is Holy Week, and we're going to have a beautiful week of Easter preparation. We're actually moving my friend into her new home this weekend. We've got a huge Easter celebration on Sunday, and I hope that you will find your Easter surrounded by family and friends if you celebrate Easter. And if not, I hope that that positive expectation that you will have a beautiful day all to yourself this Easter, and you could create a little bunny quilt. You could create a little Easter egg quilt. You could do something for you that day that feeds your soul. So thank you, everybody, for joining me here today for a little mindset magic. And we will continue to talk about mindset from time to time, because I do think that our mindset is the number one thing that holds us back, whether it's from showing our quilts and enjoying it, letting other people enjoy our quilts, right down to knowing that you can create these beautiful things in your own workroom with your own color ideas, with your own pattern ideas, not letting that fear hold you back. I hope that this little bit of positive mindset reset was just what you needed today to move yourself forward and your projects forward. So thank you for joining me here on Sewing in Slippers with Sue. I told you I was going to do an evaluation of some chalk marking products, and I didn't do that. Can we do a rain check? Let me talk about that on next Tuesday. I'll keep out all these products so I can show you next Tuesday. I'm sorry, I got carried away with this mindset work, and it's so important that it really took priority over me showing you some new products today. So thanks for joining me. We'll see you next week on Sewing in Slippers with Sue. Join me in Ahead of the Curve membership if you want to be surrounded by all of these beautiful and positive people who love working on quilts with you, who love to lift you up and encourage you in making the quilts that you want to make. Take care, everybody, and I will see you soon. Happy Easter.